Professor Velcara had been teaching xenobiology for 347 standard cycles, and in that time, she had never been wrong. Not once. Her 4 eye stalks swiveled independently as she gestured at the holographic projection floating above her lecture podium, displaying what could only be described as a very disappointed-looking wolf. "And here we have Canis lupus," she announced in the self-satisfied tone of someone who had tenure and knew it. "A primitive pack predator from the Earth sector. Note the inefficient body structure, the excessive energy expenditure during pursuit, and the frankly embarrassing success rate of only 30% on hunts." In the back row of the lecture hall, Jake Martinez was trying very hard not to laugh. He was the only human in Xenobiology 301, mostly because he was the only human crazy enough to accept an exchange program at the Andromeda Institute. Surrounded by beings from 70 different species, he'd learned to pick his battles. This, however, was not going to be one of those times he stayed quiet. Velcara continued, her translator chip rendering her clicking and whistling into smooth galactic common. "These creatures represent a fascinating example of evolutionary mediocrity. They hunt in groups because individually they are weak. They howl because they lack sophisticated communication. And they follow an alpha structure because they haven't developed the cognitive capacity for true cooperative organization." Pip, the Quilnari student sitting 2 seats over from Jake, was frantically scribbling notes with all 4 arms. Quilnari were known for their academic enthusiasm, which was a polite way of saying they treated every lecture like it was the secrets of the universe being revealed. Pip's translator rendered every word into their native language of melodic chirps, and they were eating this up. On Jake's other side, Thorn was trying to make himself smaller, which was impressive considering he was a Kragoth who stood 8 feet tall and had shoulders like a tank. Thorn was the gentlest being Jake had ever met, which apparently was unusual for his species. Most Kragoth were mercenaries. Thorn was studying environmental poetry. "Professor," Jake said, raising his hand. He kept his voice polite, friendly even. The smile on his face was the kind that people back home would recognize as dangerous. Velcara's eye stalks swiveled toward him with the kind of attention a teacher gives to a student who dares interrupt the flow of brilliance. "Yes, human Jake?" Human Jake. Not just Jake. Always human Jake. Like his species was an unfortunate condition rather than a descriptor. "I was just wondering," Jake said, still smiling, "if maybe the textbook you're using is a little out of date, or possibly written by someone who's never actually seen wolves in action." The lecture hall went quiet. Across 70 different species, the universal constant was apparently the sharp intake of breath when someone challenged a professor in the middle of a lecture. Velcara's skin flushed a deep purple, which Jake had learned meant she was either embarrassed or angry, possibly both. "I assure you, human Jake, this textbook was compiled by the finest xenobiologists in the Galactic Council. Are you suggesting you know better than experts who have studied thousands of species?" "No, ma'am," Jake said, his smile widening. "I'm suggesting that maybe wolves are a little more impressive than you're giving them credit for, and that maybe humans know a thing or two about them that didn't make it into your textbook." "Fascinating," Velcara said in a tone that meant the exact opposite. "Perhaps you would like to enlighten us all with your primitive world wisdom?" "Actually, yes," Jake said. "How about a field trip to Earth? We can observe wolves in their natural habitat, and I'll show you exactly why that 30% success rate is only part of the story." Pip's chirping reached a fever pitch. Thorn made a sound like a door creaking, which was Kragoth for profound anxiety. The rest of the class erupted into excited chatter. Velcara's eye stalks drew together in what Jake had learned was the Xanthari equivalent of narrowing your eyes. A field trip to Earth? The planet that requires 7 different vaccination protocols and has a warning rating of unnecessarily dangerous in the travel guides? "That's the one," Jake said cheerfully. "Fine," Velcara said, her skin now shifting to a shade of purple that definitely meant angry. "We will go to your Earth. We will observe these supposedly impressive wolves. And when I am proven correct, human Jake, you will write a formal apology to be published in the Institute's academic journal." "Deal," Jake said. "And when I'm proven correct, you update the textbook." Velcara's skin flushed so dark it was almost black. Agreed. This was either going to be the best decision Jake had ever made, or the worst. Probably both. Dean Rolax was a Minaxian, which meant he was roughly the size and shape of a large potato with tentacles, and he loved bureaucracy the way some species loved their offspring. When Jake walked into his office with the field trip proposal, Rolax's tentacles actually quivered with joy at the prospect of paperwork. "A field trip to Earth," Rolax said, his voice synthesizer giving him a tone of barely contained excitement. "Do you have any idea how many forms this requires?" "I'm guessing a lot," Jake said. 17, Rolax breathed, and if he could have hearts in his eyes, he would have. 17 different liability waivers, insurance certificates, medical clearances, and diplomatic notifications. This is the most beautiful thing that has happened this semester. Jake spent the next 3 hours signing documents with names like Acknowledgement of Planetary Dangers, including but not limited to large predators, small predators, plants, weather, insects, other humans, and general atmospheric hostility, and waiver of claims for psychological distress caused by exposure to Earth's gravity, oxygen content, and excessive biodiversity. By the time he was done, his hand was cramping, and Rolax looked like he might cry tears of bureaucratic joy. "Approved," Rolax said, stamping the final document with what appeared to be genuine euphoria. "The field trip will depart in 1 standard week. Try not to get anyone killed. The paperwork for that is substantially less enjoyable." The next week was chaos. The 20 students who had signed up for the trip, either out of curiosity or because they wanted to watch Jake fail spectacularly, were required to get vaccinated against 17 Earth diseases, including something called influenza, that apparently mutated faster than most species' immune systems could keep up. Pip got all their vaccinations in 1 day and spent the next 72 hours convinced they were dying. Thorn required a special needle the size of a javelin. Professor Velcara went through the entire process with a smug expression, clearly confident that the inconvenience would be worth it when she proved Jake wrong. Jake spent the week making arrangements. He called in a favor from an old friend who worked at Yellowstone National Park, explaining that yes, he was bringing aliens to see wolves, and no, he wasn't joking. Gloria Mendez, who had been his mentor during a summer internship years ago, laughed so hard she dropped her phone. "You're bringing aliens to Yellowstone in winter?" Gloria said when she finally caught her breath. "Jake, that's either the funniest thing I've heard all year or the cruelest." "Probably both," Jake admitted. "But I need to prove a point about wolves." "Oh, this I gotta see," Gloria said. "I'll get the permits ready, but you're responsible if any of them get hypothermia or eaten by a grizzly." "Pretty sure that's covered in waiver number 12, Jake said. The ship that took them to Earth was a standard transport, which meant it was comfortable for species that evolved in low gravity and had minimal atmospheric requirements. For Jake, it felt like traveling in a bouncy castle filled with helium. For his classmates, it was normal. This meant that when they landed in Wyoming, the transition was going to be rough. During the flight, Velcara held court in the observation deck, explaining to anyone who would listen how this trip would definitively prove that Earth predators were overrated. She had apparently prepared an entire speech for after they returned, tentatively titled, "The Mediocrity of Mammalian Predation, a Case Study." Jake just smiled and reviewed the presentation he'd been preparing on his datapad. He'd titled it, "How Humans and Wolves Conquered the World Together and You Didn't Even Notice." Pip bounced over to him at one point, all 4 arms gesturing excitedly. "Human Jake, I am very excited to see your planet. Is it true that you have weather that can kill you?" "Oh yeah," Jake said. "Tornadoes, hurricanes, blizzards, heat waves, sometimes all in the same week depending on where you are." Pip's eyes went wide. "And you just live there?" "We're kind of stubborn like that," Jake said. Thorn appeared behind them, ducking to fit through the doorway. "I have been reading about Earth," he said quietly, his voice like rumbling rocks. "It says that humans are the only species to domesticate large predators. Is this true?" "Yep," Jake said, "and you're about to see why." When they finally entered Earth's atmosphere, the ship's compensators struggled with the gravity. Jake felt fine. Everyone else looked like they'd been punched by physics. Pip waddled rather than walked. Velcara's eye stalks drooped. Even Thorn, who came from a high-gravity world, seemed surprised by how insistent Earth's pull was. They landed at a private port near Yellowstone just as winter was settling into the mountains. The moment the airlock opened and Earth's air hit them, 17 aliens simultaneously realized they had made a terrible mistake. "Why is it so cold?" Pip squeaked. "Why is the air so thick?" Another student gasped. "Why does everything smell like it wants to kill us?" Velcara demanded. Jake just smiled and pulled on his winter coat. "Welcome to Earth, everyone. Try not to die." Gloria Mendez was waiting for them at the park entrance in a massive four-wheel drive vehicle that looked like it could survive an apocalypse. She was a woman in her 50s with weather-beaten skin, laugh lines around her eyes, and the kind of calm competence that came from spending 30 years dealing with tourists who thought bison were just big cows. When she saw the group of aliens stumbling off the transport ship like they'd been hit by a truck, she started laughing. "Jake," she called out, "you didn't tell me you were bringing kindergartners." "Hey now," Jake said, grinning. "They're very accomplished students at a prestigious institute." "Uh-huh," Gloria said, watching Pip try to walk in Earth gravity and ending up doing something closer to an aggressive waddle. "And I'm the Queen of England." The aliens bundled into specially modified vehicles that had heating systems cranked up to what Gloria called unnecessarily tropical, and what the aliens called barely survivable. As they drove into Yellowstone, Gloria delivered her standard safety briefing, which took on a whole new dimension of horror when your audience wasn't human. "All right, folks, welcome to Yellowstone National Park," Gloria said cheerfully into the comm system. "Please keep your appendages inside the vehicle at all times. Do not approach the wildlife. The bison are not friendly. The elk are not friendly. The bears are definitely not friendly. The geysers will boil you alive. The hot springs are acidic enough to dissolve you. The wolves will ignore you unless you're stupid, in which case they might eat you. Hypothermia can set in within 20 minutes if you're not dressed properly. And whatever you do, do not pet anything." In the vehicle behind them, Jake could hear Thorn making distressed sounds. Velcara, riding in the front passenger seat with her eye stalks pressed against the heated window, scoffed. "This is clearly just theatrical warnings meant to frighten primitive worlders. I'm sure the actual dangers are minimal." Gloria glanced at Jake. Jake shook his head slightly. Gloria grinned. "Sure thing, Professor. Minimal dangers. That's definitely what we tell the families of people who get trampled by bison every year." They drove deeper into the park, the landscape transforming into something that looked like a nature documentary come to life. Snow covered everything in a blanket of white that sparkled in the afternoon sun. Steam rose from thermal features, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. In the distance, mountains jutted into a sky so blue it hurt to look at. "Your planet is very loud," Pip observed from the back seat of Gloria's vehicle. "Everything is making noise." Jake listened. Birds calling, wind rushing through trees, the crunch of tires on snow, the distant sound of water. "I guess it is," he said. "You get used to it." "We do not have this much sound on my homeworld," Pip said. "It is very organized and quiet. This is chaos." "Welcome to Earth," Jake said. "Chaos is kind of our thing." They stopped at Lamar Valley, known to park staff as America's Serengeti for its abundant wildlife. Gloria parked the vehicles on a ridge overlooking the valley, and everyone piled out, immediately regretting it as the cold hit them like a physical force. "I cannot feel my appendages," someone whimpered. "That's frostbite setting in," Gloria said cheerfully. "Better get back in the vehicles." They watched from the heated safety of the cars as Gloria pointed out various animals through her binoculars. Elk grazing in the distance. Bison being aggressively bison-like near a thermal feature. Ravens playing in the wind currents. And then, there they were. A pack of wolves moving across the valley like gray shadows, their movements coordinated and purposeful. "There," Jake said, pointing. "That's the Lamar Canyon pack. 8 individuals. They're hunting." Everyone pressed against the windows, watching. Even through binoculars, the wolves looked smaller than expected, lean and efficient rather than the massive beasts that populated Velkara's textbook illustrations. "They appear underwhelming," Velkara said. "Just wait," Jake said. The wolves moved in a pattern that looked almost like dancing, spreading out to flank a small group of elk. They weren't rushing, weren't attacking yet. They were testing, observing, looking for weakness. "This is the part your textbook gets wrong," Jake said softly. "That 30% success rate? It's not because they're bad at hunting. It's because they're smart enough not to waste energy on prey they can't catch. They're testing every single elk in that group, looking for the one that's injured, old, or sick, the one they can actually take down without getting hurt." "Predator efficiency," Pip murmured, writing notes on their datapad with two hands while holding binoculars with the other two. "No," Jake said. "Intelligence. There's a difference." One of the elk stumbled slightly, favoring its left front leg. Within seconds, the wolves' formation shifted, focusing on that individual. The hunt was over in minutes, efficient and brutal, and perfectly coordinated. "Oh my," Pip whispered. Velkara was quiet, her eye stalks focused intently on the scene below. "So," Jake said, "want to know the really interesting part about wolves?" "What?" Velkara asked, still watching the pack. "Humans almost drove them extinct," Jake said. "And then we brought them back, because we realized we'd made a mistake." Thorne spoke up from the other vehicle, his voice coming through the comm. "Why would you bring back predators that compete with you for resources?" Jake smiled. "That's the best part of the story, buddy, and it starts about 30,000 years ago." They relocated to the park's heated observation building, where Gloria had set up chairs and a portable heater that the aliens clustered around like it was the source of all life. Jake pulled up his datapad and connected it to the building's holo projector. "All right, class," Jake said, channeling every good teacher he'd ever had. "Let's talk about wolves. Specifically, let's talk about why that textbook Professor Velkara was using is missing about 30,000 years of really important context." The first image he projected was a prehistoric scene, rendered from archaeological evidence. Humans in furs sitting around a fire, and in the shadows just beyond the firelight, eyes reflecting the flames. "This is where it starts," Jake said. "Late Pleistocene, somewhere between 30 and 40,000 years ago. Humans are Homo sapiens, spreading out across the world. Wolves are Canis lupus, apex predators with one of the largest ranges of any land animal. And somehow, despite both being predators, despite competing for the same food sources, they look at each other and think, you know what? Let's team up." "That's not in the textbook," Pip said, all four hands poised over their datapad. "No, it's not," Jake agreed, "because the textbook treats it like a weird footnote. But here's the thing. This wasn't domestication in the traditional sense. Not at first. This was partnership." He clicked to the next image, showing wolves and humans hunting together, brought to life through a combination of fossil evidence and artistic interpretation. Wolves had something humans needed: better senses. They could smell prey we couldn't, hear things we couldn't, track through conditions that would blind us. Humans had something wolves needed: tools, fire, strategy, and the ability to plan complex hunts. Together, they were unstoppable. Gloria leaned against the wall, sipping coffee and watching her former student work. She'd heard parts of this story before, but never quite like this. "Wolves helped humans survive ice ages," Jake continued. "We're talking glaciers covering half the continents, megafauna that could crush you without trying, and whether that makes this," he gestured at the window showing the snowy landscape, "look like a tropical vacation." Humans and wolves hunted mammoth together, woolly rhinos, giant elk, prey that no human alone could bring down, and that wolves alone struggled with. He showed images, cave paintings from Chauvet, archaeological sites showing wolf remains buried with humans, ancient hearths with both human and wolf bones suggesting shared meals. "They migrated together," Jake said, "across continents. Humans didn't spread across the globe alone. They had wolves with them, into Europe, across Asia, eventually into the Americas. Wherever humans went, Wolves went too. Or maybe it was the other way around. The archaeological evidence suggests it might have been mutual. Velcara's eye stalks were rigid with attention now, all four focused on the display. "This is documented?" she asked. "Extensively," Jake said. "DNA evidence, fossil records, archaeological sites across 6 continents. This isn't speculation, Professor, this is history." Pip raised a hand, trembling with excitement. But how did they communicate? How did 2 species coordinate without shared language? "That's the beautiful part," Jake said. "They figured it out. Wolves learned to read human body language. Humans learned to interpret wolf behavior, eye contact, posture, vocalizations. They built a cross-species communication system through pure observation and necessity." He pulled up more images, showing the gradual change in wolf skeletal structure over thousands of years. Shorter snouts, more varied coat colors, different ear positions. "And then something really interesting happened," Jake said. "The wolves that were best at working with humans, the ones that could read our signals and cooperate most effectively, they had an advantage. They got more food, better protection, higher survival rates for their pups. Natural selection, but guided by partnership." "Domestication," Velcara said quietly. "Friendship," Jake corrected. "The domestication came later, when humans started actively breeding for traits, but the foundation was built on mutual respect and cooperation." He showed a timeline, tracking the divergence of domestic dogs from wolves, the spread of dog remains in human settlements, the increasing variety in size and shape. By 15,000 years ago, you can see distinct dog breeds appearing. By 10,000 years ago, there are dogs specialized for different purposes: herding dogs, hunting dogs, guard dogs, all from wolves. All because humans and wolves decided to work together instead of competing. Thorne spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "Your species took a predator and made it family." "Yeah," Jake said softly. "We did, and that's just the beginning of the story." He clicked to the next set of images and the entire class gasped, because suddenly the screen was filled with dogs, hundreds of different breeds, tiny ones that could fit in a teacup, massive ones that weighed more than most of the students, long-haired, short-haired, curly-haired, every color imaginable. "These are all wolves," Jake said. "Genetically speaking, every single one of these is Canis lupus familiaris. They can all still breed with wolves. They all still have wolf DNA. But humans looked at wolves and said, you know what would be cool? If we made them better at specific jobs. And we did." Pip's datapad was smoking from how fast they were typing. Bloodhounds that can track a scent across 100 miles. Border collies that can herd sheep with more efficiency than most AI systems. St. Bernards that can find people buried in avalanches. German shepherds that can detect bombs, drugs, disease. Golden retrievers that can serve as eyes for the blind. We didn't just domesticate wolves, we turned them into specialized tools, partners, family members. He paused, looking at Velcara directly. "That 30% success rate you mentioned, those wolves we saw, they feed their young, they're old, they're sick. They coordinate hunts across miles of terrain. They communicate complex strategies without technology. They've survived in almost every ecosystem on Earth, and humans looked at that and said, we can learn from this. We can work with this. We can make this better." The room was dead silent except for the hum of the heater. "So when your textbook calls them primitive pack beasts with inefficient hunting strategies," Jake said quietly, "it's missing the point. Wolves aren't primitive, they're survivors. They're cooperators. They are smart enough to partner with the weirdest species on the planet and turn it into a 30,000-year success story." Velcara's skin had shifted to a pale blue, which Jake had learned meant she was thinking very hard. "Show me more," she said. Jake's next presentation was titled, "A Brief History of Humans Making Wolves. Absolutely ridiculous and loving every minute of it." Gloria nearly choked on her coffee when she saw it. "All right," Jake said, warming to his subject. "So we've covered the practical stuff. Hunting partners, guards, herders. But here's where it gets really interesting. Humans didn't just breed dogs for utility. We bred them because we thought they were cool, or cute, or funny looking. We bred dogs for aesthetics and companionship with the same enthusiasm we bred them for work. The first image was a Siberian husky, majestic and wolf-like, posed heroically in the snow. "This is a working dog," Jake said. "Bred to pull sleds across the Arctic. Strong, efficient, purpose-built for extreme cold." The next image was a pug. The class stared in collective confusion. "This," Jake said, trying not to laugh, "is also a dog. We bred it to look like this on purpose because someone somewhere thought that flat face was adorable." "It looks like it ran into a wall," one student said. "Yeah," Jake agreed. "And people love them. They're one of the most popular breeds on Earth." He scrolled through more images. Corgis with their stubby legs and long bodies. Poodles with elaborately groomed fur. Chihuahuas that looked like angry potatoes with eyes. Dachshunds stretched out like furry sausages. Great Danes that stood taller than most of the students in the room. "We made some breeds for specific jobs," Jake explained. Dachshunds for hunting badgers in their burrows, hence the long body and short legs. Greyhounds for running down prey at speeds up to 45 miles per hour. Newfoundlands for water rescue, with webbed feet and waterproof coats. "And the small fluffy ones?" Pip asked, pointing at an image of a Pomeranian. "Companionship," Jake said simply. "We bred them to be cute, to fit on our laps, to make us happy. Some dogs exist solely because humans wanted a friend that would fit in a handbag." Thorne leaned forward, his massive frame somehow conveying intense emotion. "You bred predators to be friends?" "We bred predators to be everything," Jake said. "Friends, workers, heroes, comedians, therapists. There are dogs that detect seizures before they happen. Dogs that can smell cancer in humans with 99% accuracy. Dogs that comfort children in hospitals. Dogs that help veterans with PTSD. Dogs that exist purely to make people smile." He pulled up a video compilation. Dogs playing fetch. Dogs cuddling with babies. Dogs doing backflips for treats. A golden retriever gently carrying a raw egg without breaking it. A border collie solving a puzzle designed for primates. A massive mastiff being absolutely terrified of a kitten. The class watched in stunned silence. Pip was making small chirping sounds of distress that Gloria interpreted as, "This is too much emotional information." "We didn't just domesticate them," Jake continued. "We integrated them into every aspect of our society. There are approximately 900 million dogs on Earth right now. That's roughly one dog for every 8 humans. They live in our homes, sleep in our beds, appear in our art, star in our movies. We celebrate their birthdays. We grieve when they die. Some humans love their dogs more than they love other humans." "That's illogical," Velkara said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "Maybe," Jake said, "but it's real, and it goes both ways. Dogs have been documented traveling hundreds of miles to find their humans, staying by their human's grave for years after they die, protecting human children at the cost of their own lives. The partnership goes deep, Professor, deeper than most species' relationships with their own kind." Gloria stepped forward, pulling out her datapad. "Want to hear a personal example?" Jake nodded, and Gloria pulled up a photo of a scruffy-looking mutt, with one ear up and one ear down. "This is Murphy," Gloria said. "Mixed breed, probably part lab, part shepherd, part who knows what. I found him at a shelter 8 years ago. Last winter I was working late at my cabin doing paperwork. Murphy started barking like crazy, scratching at the door, absolutely losing his mind. I tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop. Finally, I opened the door to let him out, and that's when I smelled it. Gas leak from my heating system. If Murphy hadn't alerted me, I would have died that night. Carbon monoxide poisoning." The room was completely silent. "Dogs aren't just our companions," Gloria said quietly. "They're our partners, our protectors, our family. They've saved human lives too many times to count, and they've done it not because they're trained to, but because they care." Pip raised one hand timidly. "I do not understand. Why would another species care about you?" "Because we cared about them first," Jake said. 30,000 years ago we could have competed with wolves, driven them extinct, or been driven to extinction ourselves. Instead, we fed them our scraps, shared our fires, protected their young, and they did the same for us. That's the foundation: trust, mutual benefit, friendship. He pulled up one final image. A modern gray wolf standing in Yellowstone, majestic and wild. Next to it, a photo of an old golden retriever sleeping on a couch, graying around the muzzle, one paw dangling off the edge. These are the same species, Jake said. One chose to stay wild, one chose to come closer, and humans loved both. That's why we brought wolves back to Yellowstone after we nearly drove them extinct. That's why there are laws protecting them now. We realized what we'd almost lost. Velkara was quiet for a long moment, her eye stalks moving independently as she processed. Finally, she spoke. The textbook suggests humans domesticated wolves through force, through domination. The textbook is wrong, Jake said firmly. You can't force cooperation for 30,000 years. You can't dominate a partnership that spans the globe. Wolves chose us as much as we chose them, and together, we became something neither species could have been alone. But why? Velkara pressed. Why would you bring them back? Why protect predators that compete with your livestock, that occasionally attack your people? Why not just keep the domesticated versions and eliminate the wild ones? Jake looked out the window at the snow-covered valley where the Lamar Canyon pack was probably bedding down for the night. Because we owed them, he said quietly. They helped us survive the Ice Age. They helped us spread across the planet. They became our companions, our friends, our family. The least we could do was make sure they survived too. Even the ones that chose to stay wild. He turned back to face the class. That's what the textbook doesn't understand about wolves, or about humans. It's not about domination or efficiency or hunting success rates. It's about partnership, loyalty, respect. The wolves we saw today, they're not primitive. They're survivors who've been thriving for hundreds of thousands of years. And the dogs sleeping on couches across Earth, they're not lesser versions. They're equally successful, just in a different way. Thorne raised his hand slowly. Human Jake, I have filled out an application to study on Earth for next semester. Jake blinked. Really? Yes, Thorne said. And I would very much like to meet Murphy, and possibly acquire a dog of my own, a large one. That could sleep on my couch. Gloria burst out laughing. Buddy, I know a rescue shelter that has a mastiff that would be perfect for you. I want one too, Pip chirped. A small one, with long fur. That I can carry. Soon half the class was discussing what kind of dog they wanted, comparing notes on breeds, asking Jake for advice. Velkara watched this chaos unfold with an expression that might have been the Zenthari equivalent of bewilderment. This is not how I expected this field trip to go, she admitted. Welcome to Earth, Gloria said, clapping her on the shoulder with enough force to make her eye stalks wobble. Nothing here goes the way you expect. 3 weeks later, they were back at the Andromeda Institute, and Xenobiology 301 looked very different. The holographic projection that had once shown a primitive pack predator now displayed a split image, a wolf pack coordinating a hunt on one side, and a search and rescue dog finding a survivor in rubble on the other. Professor Velkara stood at her podium, her skin a thoughtful shade of teal. The textbook that had started this whole adventure sat on her desk, now covered in handwritten notes and revision marks. I have been teaching xenobiology for 347 standard cycles, she began, her voice lacking its usual self-satisfied tone. And I have made many correct assessments in that time. This was not one of them. Jake sat in the back row, trying not to look smug. He was mostly succeeding. The chapter on Canis lupus, Velkara continued, is being completely rewritten. The new title is Wolves, a Case Study in Symbiotic Evolution and Cross-Species Partnership. I have submitted it to the Galactic Council's Biology Committee for review. She manipulated her holocontrols, bringing up images from their trip. Wolves in Yellowstone, dogs of various breeds, humans and canines together throughout history. What I failed to understand, Velkara said, is that efficiency and success cannot be measured purely in percentages and immediate results. The wolves' 30% hunt success rate is not a sign of weakness. It is evidence of strategic thinking, of energy conservation, of long-term survival strategy. Pip, who had submitted 17 different requests to return to Earth, was taking notes with such enthusiasm that 2 of their hands were cramping. Furthermore, Velkara continued, I failed to recognize that domestication is not a simple hierarchy of dominant and subordinate species. The relationship between humans and wolves represents something far more complex. A true partnership that has lasted 30,000 years and produced benefits for both species that neither could have achieved independently. She paused, her eye stalks turning to focus on Jake. Human Jake, I believe I owe you an apology. Jake sat up straighter. Professor, you challenged my assumptions with evidence and requested I see the truth for myself, rather than rely on incomplete data. That is the mark of a good scientist. And I, despite my experience, was unwilling to acknowledge the limitations of my knowledge. Jake said eloquently. Thanks, Professor. And for what it's worth, I learned stuff too. I never really thought about how unique the human-dog relationship was until I had to explain it to someone from off-world. Velkara's skin shifted to a warm orange. Indeed. Which brings me to my next point. She pulled up a new slide. It was titled, Other Examples of Human Interspecies Partnerships. Jake's eyes widened. Oh no. Oh yes, Velkara said, and there might have been the Zenthari equivalent of a smile in her tone. You mentioned during our trip that humans performed similar domestication partnerships with horses, cats, cattle, chickens, and approximately a dozen other species. I expect a full presentation on each by the end of the semester. Jake's mouth opened and closed. That's going to take forever. Yes, Velkara agreed. Consider it your final project, and perhaps if it meets academic standards, it will become the foundation for an entirely new course. Something about human approaches to interspecies cooperation. Pip's chirping reached a frequency that was probably illegal in several star systems. Can I help, please? I want to help. I also wish to contribute, Thorn rumbled from his seat. I have been researching horses. They are large and powerful but allow humans to ride them. This seems even more improbable than the wolf partnership. That's because it is, Jake muttered, but he was smiling. The rest of the class broke into excited chatter. Students were already forming study groups, dividing up species to research. Someone wanted to know about cats. Another student was fascinated by the concept of chickens, birds that humans bred to be so absurd they could barely fly. Velkara watched the chaos with what Jake had learned to recognize as satisfaction. She manipulated her controls one final time, pulling up an image that made Jake laugh out loud. It was a photo from their trip. The entire class standing in front of the Yellowstone sign, bundled in winter gear that made them look ridiculous, and right in the center Gloria's dog Murphy, sitting proudly like he was part of the academic delegation. I had this image analyzed by our xenopsychology department, Velkara said. They noted that every species in this photo, despite wildly different evolutionary backgrounds, displays what humans call a smile, including the dog. 17 different species, all expressing the same emotion simultaneously. What emotion? Someone asked. Joy, Velkara said simply. Shared joy from a shared experience. The xenopsychologists found it remarkable. Most species struggle to read emotions across the species barrier, yet somehow in this image, everyone understood everyone else. Jake looked at the photo more carefully. She was right. Even Thorn, whose species didn't technically smile, had a posture that radiated happiness. Pip's antennae were curved in their version of a grin, and Murphy, tail mid-wag, looked absolutely thrilled to be there. That's the real lesson, isn't it? Jake said quietly. It's not just about wolves or dogs or domestication. It's about the fact that humans look at other species and see potential partners instead of just resources or threats. Yes, Velkara said. And apparently you've been doing it for so long that it's shaped your entire civilization. Your cities accommodate dogs. Your agriculture was built around partnerships with cattle and horses. Your pest control relies on cats who chose to domesticate themselves because living with humans was beneficial. You've woven other species into the fabric of your society so thoroughly that you don't even notice how unusual it is. Is it really that weird? Jake asked. Human Jake, Velcara said. All 4 eye stalks focused on him with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. Most species in the Galactic Council can barely cooperate with other members of their own species. You've built 30,000-year partnerships with creatures that can't even speak your language. Yes. It is profoundly, remarkably weird. The class laughed, and this time Velcara's skin shifted to a warm orange that definitely meant she was amused. Which brings me to my final point, Velcara said. I received a communication from Dean Rolax this morning. Jake had a bad feeling about this. Apparently, Velcara continued, 18 students have submitted applications for Earth field studies next semester. Dean Rolax is simultaneously thrilled by the paperwork requirements and terrified by the liability implications. He wanted me to inform you that if even one student gets eaten by a bear, it's on your permanent record. 18? Jake said weakly. That's almost the entire class. 19, Thorne corrected. I submitted mine this morning. I have been corresponding with Ranger Gloria about suitable dogs for large species. She suggested something called a Leonberger. 20, Pip added. I want to see cats. Human Jake says they domesticated themselves and humans just accepted it. This seems very on brand for cats. Velcara's skin rippled with what might have been laughter. As for myself, I have been invited to co-author a paper with Ranger Gloria on wolf reintroduction programs and their success rates. Apparently my perspective as an outside observer adds credibility to the findings. Gloria's writing a paper? Jake asked, surprised. She has a PhD in wildlife biology, Velcara said. Did you not know? Jake made a mental note to never underestimate park rangers again. So, Velcara said, addressing the class, let this be a lesson to all of you. Never assume that your textbook contains the complete truth. Never assume that your own knowledge is sufficient. And never ever underestimate a human when they smile and offer to show you something from their homeworld. She looked directly at Jake and her skin shifted to a deep, respectful blue. You were correct, human Jake. Wolves are not primitive pack beasts with inefficient hunting strategies. They are intelligent, adaptable survivors who were smart enough to partner with humans when they could have remained competitors. And humans were wise enough to accept that partnership and maintain it for 30 millennia. Jake felt his cheeks heat up. Compliments from Velcara were rare enough to be noteworthy. However, Velcara continued, her tone shifting back to professorial, your next assignment is due in 2 weeks. I expect a comprehensive analysis of human-horse partnerships, including but not limited to the domestication timeline, breeding variations, and the impact on human civilization development. Minimum 5,000 words. 5,000? Jake protested. You challenged my textbook, Velcara said serenely. Did you think there would be no consequences? Now you get to write the replacement material. The class burst into laughter. Jake slumped in his seat, but he was grinning. As everyone filed out after class, Pip bounced up to Jake, all 4 arms loaded with data pads. Human Jake, I have been reading about corgis. They are herding dogs, but their legs are very short. How do they herd animals much larger than themselves? Attitude, Jake said. Corgis are basically confidence in dog form. I want one, Pip declared. I have saved images of 17 different corgis and I love them all. Thorne appeared behind them, somehow managing to look both sheepish and determined. Human Jake, I have also been researching. I would like to volunteer at an animal shelter during our next Earth visit. Ranger Gloria says it would be educational. Buddy, Jake said, you're going to end up adopting every dog you meet, aren't you? Perhaps, Thorne admitted. Is this a problem? Not for me, Jake said, but you might want to warn your roommate. As they walked out into the corridor, Jake caught Velcara watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read. When she noticed him looking, she approached. Human Jake, she said quietly. Thank you. For what? For reminding me why I became a scientist, Velcara said. I spent 347 cycles teaching from textbooks, confident in established knowledge. You reminded me that the best science happens when we question our assumptions and look at the evidence with fresh eyes. Professor, Jake said, you changed your entire course curriculum because you were willing to admit you were wrong. That's pretty impressive. Yes, Velkara agreed. It is. And now I have 17 different chapters to rewrite, and a paper to co-author with a human park ranger who apparently has more degrees than I realized. She started to walk away, then paused. Human Jake? When you write your horse domestication paper, include the part about humans breeding tiny horses just because they thought they were cute. I have seen images of something called a miniature horse, and I need to understand the reasoning. There isn't any reasoning, Jake called after her. We just thought they were adorable. Ridiculous species, Velkara muttered, but her skin was warm orange, and if Jake didn't know better, he'd say she was happy. Later that evening, Jake sat in his dorm room, surrounded by research materials on horse domestication, when his communicator buzzed. It was Gloria. Hey, kid. Her voice came through. Heard you started an interstellar incident over wolves. More like an academic revolution, Jake said. How's Murphy? Still a hero, Gloria said. Also, your professor sent me a message. We're co-authoring a paper. Did you know she has 17 PhDs? I did not, Jake admitted. Yeah, well, she's apparently brilliant when she's not being a stubborn ass about textbooks. This paper's going to be good. Might actually change some minds in the Galactic Council about Earth conservation programs. That's great, Jake said. Also, apparently half my class wants to visit Earth next semester. Gloria laughed. Yeah, I heard. I'm already working on the permits. Fair warning, though, one of them wants to study cats. I tried to explain that cats are chaos incarnate with knives for hands, but they seem excited rather than deterred. That would be Pip, Jake said. They have 4 arms. I think they can handle it. Nobody can handle cats, Gloria said sagely, but it'll be fun watching them try. Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm proud of you, kid. You took a challenge and turned it into something that might actually matter. That's good science. Thanks, Gloria, Jake said. And thanks for helping with the field trip. I don't think I could have made the point without seeing the wolves in Yellowstone. Anytime, Gloria said. Now go write your horse paper. I read the assignment. 5,000 words is nothing. I once wrote a 30-page paper on bison mating behaviors. That sounds horrible, Jake said. It was fascinating and you know it. Talk later, kid. The comm disconnected, and Jake looked back at his research. Images of horses through human history. Cave paintings, ancient chariots, medieval knights, evil, modern therapeutic riding programs. The story was as complex and beautiful as the wolf partnership. Just different. He started typing, and his opening sentence was, humans looked at an animal that could kill them with a single kick and decided to become friends with it. This is either the bravest or stupidest thing we've ever done. Possibly both. Somewhere in the Galactic Council archives, a textbook entry was being updated. The new entry on Canis Lupus wouldn't call them primitive. It would call them partners, survivors, success stories written in cooperation rather than domination. And somewhere in Yellowstone, a pack of wolves howled at the winter moon, completely unaware that they'd just revolutionized xenobiology curriculum across 17 star systems. They were too busy being exactly what they'd always been. Intelligent, adaptable, successful predators who'd figured out 30,000 years ago that sometimes the best strategy isn't to fight. Sometimes the best strategy is to make friends with the weird apes with the opposable thumbs and the fire. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, those weird apes will love you enough to make sure you never go extinct. Even if it takes rewriting all the textbooks to do it.